Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. Today I'm going to be decorating the Witch's Cottage Dollhouse that I did up a few weeks ago. I'm giving it a makeover. I hope you guys enjoy. My first step was to go in and start to remove those curtains that I added and also that plastic. It was a temporary measure that I wanted to use so that we could see the beautiful glow from the outside, but from the inside it doesn't look that great. I'm also going to be giving this furniture that came with this little Sylvanian family's house a makeover. It is plastic, so I'm going to be transforming that. We've got a bed, a dining table with 2 seats to work with, and there's a stove as well that I'll show you later. So I'm going to just go in and start removing those curtains, and I also end up removing the plastic as well. And then I mixed up some cozy beige chalk paint by Paint Couture with some salt wash texture additive. This is going to thicken up my paint and it's going to give it more of like a plaster or stone effect depending on how you apply it. So I'm going to stir that really well. It's going to thicken up my paint nicely, and then I'm going to begin applying it. So I'm brushing it on the walls. I'm also dabbing and stippling it to create that texture. I ended up doing 2 coats in some areas, especially over the top of that red there. As you can see, I've gone over the cardboard that we added as well to cover up those gaps. And then I'm going in with my pine cone and pitch black mixture that I used in the first video that also has some salt wash in it. I am applying that, as you can see, to the door, the window trims. I'm also going to be adding it to the floor, and the Sylvanian family's house, as you can see, also has that beautiful paneling on the sides. This is a little bit Tudor inspired. It's very much like a fairy tale cottage, so I am going to go in and paint in wherever I can see that there would sort of be beams, and it's not going to be necessarily perfect, but that's okay. Now, I did previously prime this with some White Knight Gloss Clear Coat spray, but the chalk paint mixed with the salt wash is making it stick really well. So I'm moving on to the floors. I'm going to paint those in with that same pine cone and pitch black mixture, and then obviously the removable floor as well. Next, I'm going to be creating a fireplace. I have cut out a backing piece for the fireplace. I've cut out 2 side pieces that you can see I'm folding over there to attach to the front. I'm going to add some hot glue to that and glue it down the bottom, and I will also later be adding a floor to that as well. So I am going to go in and cut out that center part, and then I'm going to be using Paint Couture's Crust Medium, just like I did on the external part of the house. This is going to create that stone look texture. I'm going to go in and cover over the top of all of that cardboard. Before the crust medium has completely dried, I am going to be ripping up an egg carton and creating stone-like shapes, and I'm pressing that into that wet crust medium. This is going to look like, as I said, stone that's sort of been exposed on that fireplace. I'm just going to add that randomly sort of all over the fireplace, including going up into that top section as well. While that's drying, I took out this little battery operated light here. I'm taking the plastic off it, and I'm going to be using that as the inside little hearth. So I'm just measuring out some cardboard for it to sit on, and I'm also then going to go in and start adding that pitch black and pine cone mix that we added from the floor. I'm going to be painting over the top. I've got the light on so I can be sure that whatever I'm doing isn't going to affect how the light works. I'm then going to be adding some little rocks that I got from my garden there. I'm just adding that with hot glue, and I have to be mindful of this one. This has a little switch. I have to make sure that it'll still have to turn off. So I've arranged it in a way that the back rock is going to be elevated so that little switch won't be affected. I then went in and added some more hot glue underneath just to build up the area, and then when that was dry, I painted over the top of that with that same brown mix. I'm then going to be adding some of the crust medium to the inside section where the fireplace is going to go, and then I'm going to get some little dowel sticks here. This is going to be the mantle, so I'm measuring that. I'm then going to cut it to size. I had to use my craft knife and then sort of snap the pieces. I'm then going to sand the edges of those just to make sure it's nice and smooth. My crust medium is dry on the Fireplace, so I'm going to be painting that with Paint Couture's French Putty Mineral Paint. It only took one coat of this. It also has a built-in sealer as well, so that helps save me a step. So I'm just going to go in and paint over the top of that. You can see I've added that bottom section for the little fireplace to sit on, and then I'm going to go in and repeat the same process for the back part of the fireplace. When the French putty was dry, I went in with some Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze. I'm going to use this and it's going to really highlight all of that wonderful texture. I'm using a water mister to help it move around a little bit as well. I'm also using a wet wipe to pull some of it back. And then I did decide to go in and paint a couple of the little stones with that same brown paint mix that we had before, just picking out a couple of those stones randomly. And then I will continue to add that glaze over the whole thing. And as I'm pulling that glaze away with a wet wipe, it will soften the brown on those stones to make it look a little bit more natural. While the glaze is still wet, I'm adding some Dixie dirt in the color Earth. This is going to look like soot. And I'm going to also be using that same Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze on the mantle wood pieces. When they were dry, I used hot glue to attach them to the fireplace there. I'm adding some glue to the back, and then I'm also going to glue the other piece in place. Moving on to the plastic furniture now. This is a little stove that came with the Sylvanian family's house that I bought. I am going to be including it. I'm going to be using that same cozy beige and salt wash mix that we used on the wall. So I'm just going to paint straight over the top of it. The chalk paint sticks really well. I know this might not necessarily be time period correct, but I thought it still had a bit of an old world look, and I thought that once I added some paint, it would definitely go a bit better. I'm using the same paint on the table and chairs that I showed at the beginning that came with this little house. I'm just going over the top of it. I don't need it to be perfect. This is a old world house, so imperfection is fine. I'm going to add the same thing to the little chairs as well. Again, I just really did one coat, and anywhere that I sort of missed, I went in and touched that up. On the little drawer from the stove, I'm using that same brown paint mix. It has the salt wash in it. I'm dabbing and stippling that on. It's reminding me a little bit of cast iron actually. And then I moved on and started adding some of Paint Couture's Stardust Heavy Metal Metallic Paint. I'm going to add that to the tap. I did add it to the sink as well. I end up changing my mind with that and painting over the top of it, but it definitely does work well for metal. And then when that was dry, I added that same brown paint mix over the top of the top section of the little stove. So I'm just going around here. If I get it in any areas that I'm not happy with, I can wipe that back a bit, but I'm going to be adding glaze later, so I wasn't too worried about that. So you'll see I do end up going in over the top of that sink section. I didn't want it to be too modern looking, and then I went in with that Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze. I'm going to be going over the top of the whole thing, including the brown, and again, that's just going to give us this really nice vintage look. I'm then going to dab some of it off with a wet wipe, especially wiping it back off the front section to really highlight all of the beautiful details. It's really quite pretty for a plastic piece. I also added the glaze to the tables and the chairs, wiping that off, kind of following quite a similar process for each one. Hopefully you don't mind the way that we're doing this in sort of batch painting. It was just the easiest way to get these pieces done. So I'm just working on the chair, and then I moved on to the bed. I'm going to be adding that same cozy beige and salt wash mix over the top of that. I ended up doing 2 coats on this one. And then when that was dry, I used the same Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze, and this is again going to really highlight all of the details on this piece. I changed my mind on the top of the table and decided to go in and add that brown paint mix to the top of that instead, so there was a little bit of contrast. And then I took out Paint Couture's Pacific Pearl chalk paint. I'm doing some dry brushing over the top of the table. It's catching the details and the edges there and making it look a little bit like wood grain. And then I repeated the same process over the top of that little bed as well. I did a little bit of dry brushing on the stove as well. I had a few other pieces of dollhouse furniture that was approximately the right scale, so I decided that I would use that in the little house as well. So I've got a dressing table, a little stool, and just sort of a simple cupboard there. I'm going to give them the same treatment that the other furniture got. I'm going to be giving them 1 or 2 coats where needed of that cozy beige and salt wash mixture. I am going to keep the fabric that's on the stool as it is because I feel like it still suits the project. Just like the other pieces, I'm going to be adding that Van Dyke Brown antiquing glaze over the top to give the pieces more of a vintage look. So adding that and then wiping it away. When the glaze was dry, I am going to soften the look up with some more of that white dry brushing. Moving on now to the smaller decor items, I wanted to create a cauldron. So I'm using this little mini Christmas ornament. I'm going to take the top of that off and then I'm going to go in and cut that. Now this is just a plastic ornament and I'm just going to keep cutting away at the top until I have an opening, and then I went in and just kept cutting until I was happy with how it looked. And then I took out some air dry clay, rolled it up into a tiny little worm sort of a shape there, and then I'm gluing that around the top and trimming it to size. I then went in with some hot glue. I'm adding some beads on the outside section of the cauldrons. I'm going to be adding a hanging piece, a handle. This is just a little bit of wire that I had in my stash. I've bent the ends so that they sort of curve inward, and then I am pressing it into that hot glue until it's secure. When the glue was dry and the clay had a little bit of a crust, I went in with that same brown paint mix with salt wash in it, and I'm dabbing and stippling that on to create texture. And then when that was dry, I added some glue to the front and back of the hanging attachment there, and I'm going to slip it just behind the little mantelpiece. Next, I returned my attention to the inside of the house and decided that I wanted to give it a similar treatment to the furniture that I'd been working on, and I went in and did some white dry brushing like we had done on the furniture with that Pacific Pearl chalk paint. I'm going over the top of all of the sections that we painted with that brown, and then when that was dry, I added some light brown sugar antiquing glaze over the top of the walls. I wanted them to have a bit more of an antiqued look. Again, I just felt like I had given the furniture quite a vintage look, and I wanted the inside to match that and also the outside as well. I then went in with my Gorilla Super Glue Gel. I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the windows, and then I'm adding some plastic that I've cut to size so that it's not going to overlap like the other ones did. This is just going to look a lot neater. Next, I took out this little jug that I had in my stash and my copper Luxe metallic paint. I'm going to be giving this piece a makeover. I believe that this is a 3D printed piece. I got it at the Dollhouse Fair that I went to in Sydney this year. So I'm just going to add that copper paint there. And then I took out this little stick that I had in my stash. I'm going to attach some twine to it to make a little herb drying rack. So that's our hanger there. And then I went out into the garden and I just found some small grassy type plants that I thought would work. So I'm just collecting those together, 3 different types, adding some twine to them at the top, and then tying a little knot. So I just wanted to make a simple little herb drying rack that I thought a witch might have. And then I'm using hot glue to glue each of those little plant collections there, or plant bunches to our little drying rack. This is just an easy way to make a herb drying rack for your dollhouse. Next, I took out these little miniature jars. I got these at the Dollhouse Fair as well, and I am just adding some more of that greenery that I used on my herb drying rack, cutting off little bits and pieces and putting them into the jars. A witch's cottage is not complete unless she's got a cupboard of ingredients to make her spells and potions. So I'm just adding those little bits in, adding the lid on them. So I did 3 jars with different bits of dried grassy products. I'm not even sure what that would be called, and added the little lids. And then I printed these little labels here. I will include the link below. I'm going to add those with Eileen's tacky glue to the jars, just adding whichever I felt suited the jar, and just kept going until I had little labels on each of them. For my 4th jar, I decided to use some of Paint Couture's Sheer Frost German glass glitter. I'm going to get a little bit of that in the container. I'm then going to add a little label that said Fairy Tears on it. I thought that suited the label quite well, and I am going to be gluing each of the lids on so they don't keep popping off. This other jar here was one that I already had in my stash. Someone had already put some little beads in there, so I just added a little label. Next, I found this little dollhouse table that I had in my stash, so I'm going to go in and use Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze on that one. I thought it would look really great as a little maybe potion sort of a table. I'm going to add some shelves above it. And then I decided to go in and use that same glaze on the lids to give them more of a vintage look. I'm adding a little bit to the labels as well. So these are the shelves that I made to go above our little table there that's going to have the potion bottles on it. I've used the Van Dyke Brown Antiquing Glaze on those. And I then took out this other little stick here. I'm going to be making a witch's broom. I've got this little coconut rough style stuff. I just took out a portion of it about the length that I wanted, and then I'm going to cut it so that it's all sort of separated a little bit there and not folded. That would look a little bit odd. And then once I've got it arranged that I want, the way that I want, I'm going to be adding the stick, and to help secure it in place, I'm adding a little bit of glue and then carefully pressing those pieces together. But ultimately what's going to hold it together is this twine that I'm going to wrap around a few times and then tie a knot. After trimming off the excess twine, I also trimmed off the bottom little coconut rough pieces until I was happy with how it looked. I had some leftover planter liner that I used on the roof, so I've cut that to make a mattress and a pillow. I'm going to be covering that with just some calico fabric that I'm going to attach with hot glue. Just basically sort of like wrapping a present. I didn't think I needed to do it perfect. This witch's bed is pretty primitive, so I'm going to just add glue down the center and then on each side, and then I'm going to be repeating the same process for the little cushion that we're making to go with it. I decided then, however, I did want to add a little bit of lace, so I'm going to add a little bit up the top and a little bit down the bottom of the mattress. I just thought it was a nice, simple, sweet touch. Next, I'm going to make a witch's hat. So I've got a little bit of clay there that I am pressing out into a circular shape, flattening that out. And then I've got another piece of clay that I am molding for the top section of the witch's hat. I want to give the bottom a bit more stability though, so I'm cutting out some egg carton that's going to fit on the bottom, that I'm going to glue that bit of clay over the top of that. That's going to give it a bit more stability and strength. So I'm going to stretch that clay over the top of that, and then I'm going to add a bit more glue in the center and add the top section of the witch's hat. I then went in with a wet wipe and just sort of pressed down on the clay around the seam there to blend it together a little bit more seamlessly. And then when that was dry, I added some of Paint Couture's pitch black chalk paint over the top. I then decided to make some skulls. So I'm just molding a little piece of clay there. I'm then going to use the end of a paintbrush to make some little eye holes. I used the head of a pin though to do the little nose section, and then I sort of just scraped down to make some teeth. It's not perfect, but I did the best I could. And then when it was dry, I used some Van Dyke Brown antiquing glaze to give it a vintage spooky look. Next, I took out this little plastic chess piece that I thrifted, this little tongue depressor stick. I'm going to be making a book stand. So right now I'm cutting out 2 pieces of wood for where the book is actually going to go up the top. I'm then going to cut out a smaller piece of wood for the base of that book stand. So 2 of those to give it a little bit more stability. I'm then going to glue those 2 pieces together and use some sandpaper to smooth out and sort of curve the corners of the base stand pieces. I'm adding some hot glue to that little plastic chess piece, and I'm going to press that into the center of the base piece, and then I'm gluing the 2 largest sections, that's where the book's going to go, and also sanding the edges and corners of that one. To give this piece a bit of an ornate touch, I'm using hot glue in my redesign Lysandra mold, just a section of it. And then while that's setting up, I'm going to add a little bit of a puddle pop stick to the bottom section so that the book has something to sit on. I'm then adding some glue to the back of the little book stand piece and where it's going to meet, and then I'm also going to add some more pieces to the back of that to give it stability. So I just sort of went with my instincts on this one and just sort of kept adding pieces while still trying to make it look neat from the back. I couldn't really find a tutorial on how to do this one, so I had to sort of just make it up as I went, and I was pretty happy with how that looked. I added another little piece. So these are just offcuts from those tongue depressors, so I don't tend to throw things away because you never know when you can reuse them in your projects. And then I'm reinforcing it all with hot glue at the back there until I'm happy with how stable it is. Next, I moved on to taking out the mold from the Lysandra mold. I had to tidy it up a little bit with a craft knife, but I've just glued that on the top. I'm then going to use that pine cone and pitch black mix over the top. I'm dabbing and stippling that on in some places, and once the paint was on this, it definitely came together and looked a lot more cohesive. And I'm so glad I picked up that bag of plastic chess pieces. I then went in and did some dry brushing like I've done with a lot of my pieces throughout this video. This is going to catch the details and it's going to highlight the edges, and I think it just really gives a lot of character to the piece as well. And then once that was dry, I decided I wanted to add a little bit more bling to this piece. And so I took out Paint Couture's Bronze Luxe Metallic. I'm going to be adding that just over the high points. I've got my brush on a bit of an angle, and then also the edges as well. It's just going to give it a little bit more elegance. This is where the witch keeps her precious spell books, so it has to be a little bit grand. I then moved on to creating a spell book. So this one ended up being a little bit big. I'm just using some printables and some cardstock. I will try and link as many of the sites that I used as I can. This one ended up being a better size, so I'm going to be displaying this book. This is an open book one, so it's going to stay on that little book stand. I decided to antique the book pages and the edges with that same Van Dyke Brown antiquing glaze. Next, I'm working on another little miniature that I bought at the Dollhouse Fair. Again, this is just a resin piece. It was a little hare, and I thought it would be really fun to add it to our witch's cottage. I'm sure she's got lots of animal friends, so this is a little hare that she has that comes to visit her in her house. So I'm using that same brown paint mix, and I'm also doing some more of that white dry brushing over the top. Next, I'm rolling up some printer paper that I've cut to size into a mini scroll. So I've got it rolled to the size I want. I'm going to trim off the excess, and then I'm going to add some hot glue to hold that paper in place. It's also going to act like a wax seal. To make an open scroll, I'm going to roll up the ends of a longer piece of that A4 paper. I'm just sort of bending it to make it look like it's been read many times. And then I'm going to go in and carefully add some little beads of glue on the end pieces of each of the scroll ends to help hold it in place and to make it look like it's the little sort of handles of the scroll as well. So I'm repeating the same process on each of the ends. To age my scrolls, I'm using that same Van Dyke Brown antiquing glaze, but I'm also alternating with some of the light brown sugar antiquing glaze. So it looks like they're sort of aged at different ages. And I'm also using the glaze on the scroll. I then took out red velvet mineral paint. I'm going to add that to the little wax seals on the scrolls, and then I'm using bronze luxe metallic on the ends of the open scroll piece. When that was dry, I went in with a lead pencil and just did some little scribbles on the scroll to make it look like miniature writing. Next, I'm going to make some more miniature books. So I've printed off a bunch of covers, I've cut out a bunch of cardstock and also A4 paper, and I'm just folding that over, and then I'm using glue on the edges and on the inside to keep that closed. I'm also using my antiquing glaze to give the book pages and covers a little bit more age. I'm also going to be making some fun book stacks. So I've just glued 3 books together using some hot glue, just sort of staggering the way that they are arranged there. And then I'm going to add some more hot glue on one of the skulls we created and also some dried greenery. I'm also going to be making some other books with cardboard in between the printed covers. These are for my book stacks when you're not going to see the page details. This is a great way to make some tall book stacks to sit in corners. And they look really quirky and fun, I think. Next, I took a break from making miniatures and focused on the lighting. So I'm going to be using this Amazon LED light string here to add lights to the dollhouse. And I'm going to also be cutting up bits of hot glue sticks to make candles. I'm going to vary the sizes a little bit, but I'm just going to use the 1 battery pack of lights to light up the interior of the house. I'm going to begin by making a cut down one side of the glue stick so that there's a gap that I can slide that LED light into and just have the light poking out the top. I'm then going to secure it in place with some hot glue. I then added some hot glue to a paddle pop stick that I am going to be adding underneath a window for a little shelf. And then I'm going to add some hot glue to that so that the candle can sit on it. I'm then going to continue and repeat this process. I added a shelf to the window next to that and then glued that little candle down. I then added some glue to the lights so that they would run along the floor, and then I pulled it over to the little stove in the corner and added more glue there. I'm putting some holes in the back of my fireplace mantle so that I can pull some LED lights up through those holes so that I have candles on the mantle. Once I've pulled the LED lights through, I'm going to attach some more of my little glue sticks. Again, just pulling that cable each time to make sure it's tight. I'm going to add some glue to the back of the mantle there and pull it into place. I then pulled the wire there up through to the top floor so it was ready for the next one. So as I said, I'm just adding some hot glue sticks over the top of those LED lights that we added on the mantle, one on each side, and then I'm going to move on to the top. So I've got this little cupboard. I've drilled a hole so that I can pull the light through. This is going to cover over that gap on the right hand side. So I'm just going to pull that LED light through, then push that little, put that little cabinet in place. And as you can see, I've already added another little glue stick there for that LED light to sit in. I'm then going to continue the lights journey over. I've made another little candlestick there to sit on the dressing table in the corner there. So I'm just going to glue that down. And then I wanted to have the light go over to the other side. So I actually pulled it back through the floor so that the wire was sort of hidden between the seam, and then I pulled it back up. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm adding another little paddle pop stick shelf, and then I'm going to glue that little candle there. That one ended up being a little bit wonky, but I don't think that really matters here. So I glued that one in place, and then I pulled the cord back through again underneath the floor, and I will glue it on the underside of the floor so that I can still turn the lights on and off, but it will be pretty much hidden. I then went in with some more of that brown paint mix to cover up the lights that were on the floor and anywhere that it might be visible and not in a candle. Next, I printed some images on this t-shirt iron-on transfer paper to make some rugs. So as you can see here, I've already printed it on there. This is a miniature rug. It's a pretty good scale here. It's an area rug, and I'm going to be adding it to this calico fabric. First of all, I'm going to iron it, and then I'm going to add some more heat, just following the instructions that were on the iron-on pack there. I'm going to press the design side down, and then I'm going to add the iron to it, moving it around, applying pressure for about 30 to 60 seconds. I'm then going to peel that away, and then when I'm finished peeling that away, I'm going to trim it to size. So this was really fun. I probably could have just printed it on paper, but I felt like adding it to the fabric it definitely gave it more dimension and weight and made it look a little bit more real. So I'm going to cut the excess fabric off. I probably could have made a little fringe, but I decided to just keep it simple. And then I did the same thing for the other little rug. So one of them is going to go up the top and one down the bottom. Moving on to the curtains, I decided I wanted them to be open. So I'm using the original fabric I had, cutting it in half. I'm then going to pull it together and I'm going to be gluing it to this little stick here. The sticks are actually just from a grapevine wreath. I thought they were quirky and imperfect and that they would make great curtain rods. I'm going to add another piece of fabric to the other side and just gluing that in place. And then I tied some twine around the center of each of the curtain sides. So I tied a knot and then cut off the excess twine. And then I also ended up trimming off the bottom part of the curtain as well, as it was a little bit long. I didn't show putting this inside the dollhouse because it was very fiddly. I wasn't quite finished making miniatures yet. I wanted to make some mini pumpkins, so I've rolled up some clay into a ball and then I used my palette knife to go in and make some indents to make it look like a little pumpkin. I made a bunch of these and then when they were somewhat dry, they got a nice little crust on them. I went in with Paint Couture's Firelight mineral paint, just one coat of this. I didn't need it to be perfect. And then when that was dry, I added some Van Dyke Brown and Teaking Glaze to give them a little bit more of a realistic look. I then broke off little bits of that grapevine wreath stick and I stuck them in the center of each of the pumpkins to make them look like stalks. A witch's house really isn't complete without a black cat, so I decided that I would just have a bit of a play with my clay and try and make one that looks like it's laying on the bed. I didn't end up filming the whole thing. It was very tedious, but ultimately it came together pretty well, as you can see here. I think it's passable, and I ended up using pitch black chalk paint over the top of our little kitty that's lying down. And then when that was dry, I used bronze luxe metallic on the head of a pin, and I used that to create some beautiful, almost glowing eyes on our little kitty. And then I used that pitch black again on the head of the pin to do the pupils. And now it's time to add our miniatures to the house. To secure the rugs and smaller miniatures in place, I used museum wax on the corner of the rugs and just a little bit on the bottom of each of the items just to keep them nice and secure. A lot of the miniatures in this video are pieces that I made today or previously. Some of them I did pick up from places like Facebook Marketplace or at dollhouse fairs. I will try and link those sites below if I can still find them. Remember, you don't have to have a dollhouse to be able to do something like this. You could create a little miniature Halloween scene in a book box so that it's something easier for you to store when you don't want it on display. The mini bookstacks that I made are going to help hide those extra wires at the back there. And I made this little crystal ball out of just some beads and jewelry attachments that I glued together previously. I think my favorite thing in this house that I made is this book stand. I'm definitely proud of that one. I was inspired by Charmed and the stand that they put the Book of Shadows on, so I'm very happy with how that turned out. My little black cat isn't perfect, but I do think that he looks quite sweet sitting on the bed there. Not bad for a simple little clay cat, I think. One of the longest parts of this project was the books, but I found some amazing different book covers to use, and I will link the site where I got them below. I think it just really adds to that wonderful witchy realism. Now let's step inside and take a tour of the witch's cottage. This project was a lot of work, but it was so fun. I'm really glad that I decided to decorate the inside of my little witch's cottage. Let me know what you think of today's project in the comments below, and if you had a favorite miniature from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and stick around, because I had a little bit of a play with some spooky editing software on these next clips. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find a full product list and my affiliate links in the description below. Thanks for watching.